We're also tracking new legal blowback in Washington after President Trump's top national security officials texted sensitive information about airstrikes to each other and a journalist. A federal judge has now ordered the White House to preserve all of those messages in that group text, as President Trump privately fumes over his national security advisor's prominent role in that security lapse. Still, nobody's faced disciplinary action. But a new YouGov poll shows nearly 3/4 of Americans view this Signal ordeal as a serious problem. And while Republicans surveyed were far less likely to call it a very serious problem, still 60% say it is serious. Joining us now, NBC's Aaron Gilchrist at the White House, as well as former federal prosecutor Barrett Berger and former Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh. Aaron, the national security implications of this lapse are now leading to some political headwinds. What position does that put the White House in?
Well, Anna, it puts the White House in the position of having to deal with really multiple storylines that are converging in many ways right now, this week in particular. And our understanding is that President Trump has expressed some frustration that this is all making the Republican Party look bad. Two Republican sources have told NBC News that the president in particular was frustrated with his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who created this Signal chat group a couple of weeks ago and really has sort of been the first person that the president has looked at and pointed to for fumbling this whole situation. He's also expressed, according to these sources, some frustration that the Congress seat that Mike Waltz used to hold is now a competitive race for Republicans in that area. Although the expectation is that the Republican candidate will win there, there's been some movement as of late that indicates that this is more competitive than was expected, Anna. And so the president is not happy with all these stories that are coming together at the same time and sort of getting in the way of messaging he wants to have put out there about what he's trying to do, as he said, to help the American people, Anna.
And Aaron, we've exclusively learned this isn't the first time this administration has had something like this happen, where a journalist got mistakenly added to sensitive communications. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, our Julia Ainsley, who covers Homeland Security, has been able to learn that a longtime Department of Homeland Security employee, a career worker there, apparently included a journalist on a message about an ICE operation in the Denver area earlier this year. This was not classified information, but it was sensitive. She apparently realized the mistake herself, and this was sort of reported up the chain, according to sources that Julia has been able to speak to. This employee has been told that she would not only be put on administrative leave, but late last week was told that the agency intended to revoke her security clearance. And this really opens up conversations about unequal treatment. If she is to be placed on leave and her security clearance revoked, the question has arisen, why is the same thing not happening to the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, who placed this sensitive military information in that group chat, and the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, who created this group chat for that information to go into. There are questions now, Anna, about whether this is just a really unfair treatment that should not exist.
Aaron Gilchrist, thank you so much. And Barrett, there's another new development. We mentioned that now a federal judge is essentially ordering the White House to preserve all of these communications. According to The Atlantic, the messages were set to disappear after 1 week. And then at some point, the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, had changed that to 4 weeks. But what are the legal implications of disappearing messages when it comes to White House communications, official communications that have national security implications?
So Judge Boasberg's order is not particularly controversial. Judges routinely order the government to retain documents. In fact, there's laws requiring the government to have communications documents set to a way that they can be accessed in the future in case it comes up. What will be interesting to see is whether the government's actually able to comply with the judge's order, because exactly as you said, the entire purpose of apps like Signal is that they have functions where they can have messages disappear. If, in fact, the government had these set to a way that they were not retained in accordance with what the law requires communications like this to be, they are going to have trouble not only complying with Judge Boasberg's order, but potentially in violation of these federal laws.
Sabrina, when this story first broke, a lot of people thought about Hillary Clinton. Well, she's out with an op-ed in the New York Times today calling the Trump team's actions just dumb. And she writes this: as a businessman, he bankrupted his Atlantic City casinos. Now he's gambling with the national security of the United States. If this continues, a group chat foul will be the least of our concerns, and all the fist and flag emojis in the world won't save us. You worked in the Pentagon. How is all this reverberating with everyone who has had these rules that they know about drilled into them when it comes to national security?
Yeah, from people that I've spoken with that are still in the building or serving overseas, you know, this is something that is drilled in from day one when you're a junior officer and going into the military. One of the things that you always preserve is OPSEC, which is operational security. You always preserve the security of our pilots who are going to conduct, those fighter pilots that are going to conduct that operation that's being referenced in that group chat. So the fact that the Secretary of Defense, the person in charge with safeguarding our military, put operational details about this military operation before it had happened into a chat is something that no officer would ever do in the Pentagon or serving around the world. And frankly, if they had done this, they would have been held to a different standard. They would have been immediately put on administrative leave, and an investigation would have been opened, similar to that DHS employee that you had referenced earlier in this conversation. So it's a completely different standard that Pete Hegseth is being held to, and it's concerning because he's the Secretary of Defense who should be looking out for the safety and well-being of those fighter pilots conducting that operation.
The New York Times just spoke with former and current service members, specifically U.S. military pilots, about the implications of all this. And one retired Navy pilot said, quote, "The whole point about aviation safety is that you have to have the humility to understand that you are imperfect. Ultimately, if you can't admit when you're wrong, you're going to kill somebody because your ego is too big." Sabrina, should the rank and file feel confident lessons have been learned and this won't happen again?
Well, I don't think any lessons have been learned because, you know, clearly you saw the Secretary of Defense doubling down as he's on his swing through Asia, taking no accountability, not expressing any single bit of remorse or the fact that, you know, this is never going to happen again. I think the concerning part here is, you know, this chat group was exposed because a reporter was inadvertently added to it. What other chats exist out there about ongoing military operations that could put any one of our airmen, our soldiers, our sailors at risk because Secretary Hegseth can't seem to understand how to preserve operational security? So I think that is deeply concerning, and that's why you're seeing a judge not only say, you know, these messages need to be preserved, but frankly, I think Congress needs to, you know, open an investigation and figure out if there are any other chats like this that exist so that our military, our folks in uniform defending our nation and our freedom abroad are safe.
Barrett, there's this federal records law that we already spoke about, but when you look at this episode, do you see any other potential legal violations here? Does the Espionage Act come into play at all?
It absolutely could. It's hard to know right now which of this information is classified, which is not. Hard for us to say from the outside. But the idea behind all of these laws, including the Espionage Act, goes to this central idea of trying to keep sensitive or classified information from the United States from getting into the wrong hands. That's exactly why we have proper channels for dealing with classified information. When I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office and had a high security clearance, anytime we wanted to have a conversation, we had to go into a SCIF. Your phones were left outside. There's paneling along the walls. These were the official channels. An app like Signal, even though it may be great for people like us when we want to have confidential communications, is not foolproof in the same way that those official channels are.
And of course, there is that encryption aspect of Signal, which makes it better than other apps. But we have heard a lot of criticism from former national security and intel officials that this Signal app was used at all for this type of communication. Sabrina, various Trump allies and Republican lawmakers have tried to point the finger at the Biden administration for allowing officials to use Signal. What's your reaction to that? And I'm curious, how was Signal used when you were at the Pentagon?
So I never had Signal on my work phone when I was at the Pentagon, nor in the vice president's office. I'm not aware of, other colleagues that had it. But that being said, Signal is not an app that you would use to coordinate on a military operation. And, you know, what Pete Hegseth put in that chat, anything pre-operational is all classified, and putting that in a unclassified Signal app. And I have a feeling that some of the individuals that were using that Signal thread were using it on their personal phone, that could have been intercepted by one of our adversaries. You know, at any time, we know that our adversaries and cyber hacking groups are always trying to get into our phones. And if that information had gotten into the Houthis' hands, they could have adjusted their force posture on the ground. They could have repositioned their air defenses and shot down one of our pilots. And we could be having a very different conversation today. But thankfully, you know, our pilots were safe. But again, this is something that the Secretary of Defense, someone that has served in uniform, should really know better.
Sabrina Singh and Barrett Berger, appreciate the conversation. Thank you both so much.